Chapter 7 is on cellular respiration. Chapter 7, Section 1 says that cellular respiration is a series of complex reactions that is going to convert organic compounds into usable energy in the form of ATP, which, if you recall, is adenosine triphosphate. And this process is going to be used by both heterotrophs and autotrophs. If you recall, it works along with photosynthesis. Remember, they're biochemical pathways. And photosynthesis involves taking in light energy, carbon dioxide and water, and producing sugars and oxygen. And through this process, we're essentially doing the opposite. We're taking those sugars and oxygen, and we're going to be producing CO2 from that. So they work together. The products of photosynthesis begin cellular respiration. The products of cellular respiration begin photosynthesis. Here's a general overview of cellular respiration. This is our equation, and it should look a little familiar to you. It is the photosynthesis equation, except written in the opposite direction. So essentially our arrow is just pointed the opposite direction. We've got our sugar molecule, or our carbohydrate, combined with oxygen to make carbon dioxide and water, and we're also going to be making ATP for the organism. So it is the exact opposite of photosynthesis, and it occurs in two stages. Glycolysis is going to be our first step. And then, depending on whether there's oxygen available in the cell or not, they can go through two different processes. One, it would be an anaerobic process if there is not enough oxygen available. And then if there is enough oxygen available, then they will go through aerobic respiration, which is the ultimate goal, because that is where we're going to be making the most energy. So glycolysis is a biochemical pathway where glucose, which is our sugar molecule, is broken down into pyruvic acid, which is also called pyruvate, and NADH, which is just an energy storage molecule. So this is going to take place in the cytosol, which are those little liquid portions of the cytoplasm. And the purpose is to make reactants for the next step. So this isn't the end result of cellular respiration. It's just the beginning. We're breaking down glucose into pyruvic acid and NADH, and we're going to make reactants for the next step along with a little bit of energy. So a couple ATPs to keep the process moving. These are the general steps of glycolysis. You start with a couple phosphate groups from ATP that are going to be added to glucose, and then they split that compound in half into two molecules called G3P. They're also sometimes called PGAL. And those two G3P molecules then gain a phosphate group to make a new 3-carbon compound and convert NAD plus into NADH, which is a way of storing energy. The phosphate groups are then removed to form pyruvic acids and added to an ADP molecule, or diphosphate molecule, to make ATP, which is triphosphate. And that's what this diagram here shows. We take a glucose molecule, essentially split it in half, rearrange a couple phosphate groups, and we end up making these pyruvate molecules. So at that point in time, we now have pyruvic acid and NADH, so it's which way we go depends on whether there's oxygen available. If there's not oxygen, then the cell's going to undergo fermentation. If there is oxygen, then we're going to undergo aerobic respiration. So in anaerobic conditions, the cell will undergo fermentation, and there's two main types that we're going to talk about: lactic acid and alcoholic fermentation. And the purpose here is mainly just to regenerate NAD plus to keep glycolysis running. So we'll make a couple ATPs. It's really to try again for the aerobic respiration process. With lactic acid fermentation, your reactants are the products of glycolysis, so pyruvic acid and NADH, and what you're making is NAD plus and lactic acid. So lactic acid fermentation makes lactic acid. And this fermentation process is used in different manufacturing fields to make things like yogurt and cheese. It's also an acid that helps to build up sore muscles. When you're working out really hard and using up lots of oxygen in your cells, this lactic acid can build up and cause you to have some sore muscles until it eventually diffuses back through the bloodstream. With alcoholic fermentation, we're still taking pyruvic acid and NADH, which are again our products from glycolysis, but this time instead of making lactic acid, we're going to be making ethyl alcohol. And this fermentation process has been utilized in making breads and different alcoholic beverages such as beer and wine. Now, glycolysis is not a very efficient process. It doesn't produce much ATP. It's just a couple ATPs, and most of the glucose's original energy is still held in that pyruvic acid form. So we haven't utilized all we possibly could.